blood doesn't wash off marble. Not in Ephesus, not in 41 BC. A young woman is hauled across the temple floor by her hair, her voice raw, her pleas bouncing off walls that were built to honor gods. Then silence. A blade finds her throat, and the sacred ground drinks what pours out. The person who gave that order wasn't a foreign conqueror, wasn't a Roman warlord. It was the victim's own blood, her sister, her flesh, Cleopatra. Forget everything Hollywood sold you. The soft-eyed queen weeping over a dying lover, pressing a serpent to her skin like some poetic farewell. That woman never existed. The real Cleopatra didn't cry. She calculated. She was not a tragic heroine caught in the tides of empire. She was the tide. A predator so precise, so cold, that every kiss she gave carried the weight of a political execution. History has been repackaged to make her sympathetic. A brave queen, a defender of her kingdom, a woman forced into impossible choices. But when you pull the wrapping off, what's underneath is something far darker. Cleopatra turned her own body into a weapon of statecraft. Love was never part of the equation. She offered intimacy the same way a general offers terms of surrender, as a transaction, with a blade hidden behind every whisper. She fed poison to a boy king who shared her bloodline. She signed the death warrant on her own sister's life and watched it carried out on holy ground. And the most feared military minds in Roman history? She broke them, bent them into instruments of her will, and discarded them when they stopped being useful. People were not people to her. They were positions on a board, and bloodlines were just lines she was willing to cross. What unfolded during her reign was not a love story. It was not a tragedy. It was a slow, deliberate, ice-cold exhibition of psychological dominance and unrestrained violence, dressed in gold and perfume. Today, we're cutting through every layer of myth, every romanticized lie, to reach the woman underneath. We're going to trace every drop of blood she spilled to hold her throne. And we're going to prove that her famous death, the one the world remembers as a defeat, was actually her final, most brilliant act of control over an empire that thought it had won. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what city and country you're watching from. Take a second to subscribe and support what we're building here. You are watching Ancestral, the best dark history channel in the world. To understand what Cleopatra became, you have to understand the machine that built her. Alexandria in 51 BC was not a jewel of civilization. It was a slaughterhouse dressed in gold. The Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek bloodline that had gripped Egypt for nearly 300 years, did not govern through wisdom. They governed through elimination. Brothers married sisters, not out of love, out of control. Blood purity was doctrine, and the price of that doctrine was a family tree soaked in murder. Every marriage was a countdown to a killing. Poison lived in the wine. Blades waited behind curtains. You didn't trust your mother. You didn't trust your siblings. You didn't even trust the people who fed you. This was the air Cleopatra breathed from birth. She was not raised in some gilded paradise of poets and scholars. She was raised in a cage where the only rule was simple: kill before you are killed. When her father, Ptolemy XIII, finally died, he left behind two things: a kingdom drowning in debt to Rome, and a will that was less an inheritance than a loaded weapon. Cleopatra, barely 18, was ordered to marry her own brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was 10. They were supposed to rule together. Historians like to brush past this detail, file it under ancient custom. But there was nothing customary about it. Co-regency in this family was a polite word for a death match, and Cleopatra had absolutely no intention of sharing power with the child, or more precisely, with the men pulling his strings. From the very first day, she moved like a conqueror. She erased her brother's image from the coins. She stripped his name from official records. She ruled alone, openly, aggressively, as if the boy king simply did not exist. It was not arrogance. It was a declaration, a dare. She was telling every advisor, every general, every schemer in the palace that she was the only authority in Egypt. And she was waiting for someone to challenge her. They did. The men behind the throne, a cunning eunuch named Pothinos, and a hardened military commander named Achilles, understood exactly what they were looking at. Cleopatra was too intelligent, too ambitious, and far too dangerous to leave unchecked. If she consolidated power, they would be dead within months. So, they moved first. They turned the streets of Alexandria against her, spreading word that the queen was preparing to sell Egypt to Rome. The city erupted. Mobs poured through the avenues. Cleopatra barely escaped with her life, disappearing into the brutal emptiness of the Syrian desert. This is the moment where the story is supposed to break her. The exiled queen, alone, powerless, weeping in the sand. That is the version the movies want you to believe. The real version is nothing like it. Cleopatra did not mourn. She mobilized. Deep in that wasteland, she spent every coin she had buying an army of mercenaries with no loyalty to anyone but gold. She was not waiting for a hero. She was building a war machine. She positioned her forces at the Egyptian border, staring directly at the full strength of her brother's army. Civil war was a breath away. Then the entire board flipped. A Roman ship appeared on the horizon. Pompey the Great, one of the most celebrated generals Rome had ever produced, had just been destroyed in a civil war against Julius Caesar. Wounded, desperate, out of moves, Pompey sailed for Egypt. He had been a friend to Cleopatra's father. He expected protection. He expected the wealth of the Nile to fund his comeback. He anchored offshore and waited for a welcome. The boy king's advisors saw a different kind of opportunity. They rowed a small boat out to meet him. They smiled. They extended their hands. And the moment Pompey stepped aboard, a blade went through his back. They severed his head in full view of his wife, who stood screaming on the deck of his ship. They drained it, packed it in salt, and set it aside like a gift. They believed this offering would buy them Caesar's loyalty. They believed they had outmaneuvered the most powerful man alive. They were catastrophically wrong. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria days later and was handed the severed head of his former ally, he did not smile. He wept. And then came the fury. A Roman consul had been butchered on foreign soil by a puppet government. Caesar occupied the royal palace immediately, not as a diplomat, as a judge. He summoned both Cleopatra and Ptolemy III, ordering them to end their war and submit to his ruling. The boy king had every advantage. He was already inside the palace. He had Caesar's ear. His advisors were whispering day and night, building a case against the exiled queen. Cleopatra, meanwhile, was still trapped in the desert, surrounded by forces that would kill her on sight. Every gate into Alexandria was sealed. Every road was watched. If she tried to walk into the city, she would never reach the palace alive. She had to get to Caesar before her brother poisoned every word against her. And she had to do it in a way no one would see coming. The story you have heard is a fairy tale. The seductive queen? unrolled from a luxurious carpet at the feet of a smitten general. Romantic, cinematic, and completely hollow. What actually happened was a covert infiltration that could have ended with her body dumped in a harbor. Cleopatra disguised herself and hired a loyal Sicilian merchant named Apollodorus. Under the cover of night, they slipped past naval blockades in a small, unmarked vessel. Apollodorus did not wrap her in silk. He shoved her into a rough hemp sack, the kind used for hauling dirty laundry, and tied it shut. He threw her over his shoulder and walked straight past armed guards who would have opened her throat without hesitation. One curious blade, one suspicious sentry, and the entire trajectory of Western civilization dies on a dock in Egypt. When the sack was cut open inside Caesar's private chamber, Cleopatra did not emerge like a fantasy. She emerged like a strategist, covered in sweat, hair tangled, eyes sharp. She did not seduce Caesar with perfume and soft words. She seduced him with numbers, with logistics, with access to the largest treasury on earth. Caesar needed gold to pay his legions. Cleopatra had it. Cleopatra needed a military force capable of crushing her brother's army. Caesar commanded the deadliest infantry ever assembled. By sunrise, they had made a pact written not in love, but in mutual necessity and blood. The next morning, Ptolemy III entered the throne room and found his sister sitting beside the most powerful man in the world. The boy king understood instantly. He had lost. He ripped the crown from his head, stormed into the streets, and screamed to anyone who would listen that he had been betrayed. Alexandria erupted into war. The boy king's generals threw everything they had at the palace. Caesar and Cleopatra were pinned inside with a fraction of his forces. What followed was the siege of Alexandria. Months of pure carnage. Flaming projectiles arced over palace walls. Close-quarters combat choked every corridor and alley. The great library of Alexandria was consumed by fire, and centuries of irreplaceable human knowledge turned to ash in columns of black smoke. The Egyptian forces grew so desperate, they flooded the palace aqueducts with seawater, trying to kill the defenders through thirst. Caesar's men were ordered to tear through the stone floors with their bare hands, digging for any source of drinkable water beneath the foundations. This was not a love story. This was a siege. And Cleopatra was at the center of every decision, watching every death, absorbing every lesson. She saw Caesar, the greatest military mind of his age, forced to leap into the harbor and swim under a storm of javelins, abandoning his own purple cloak to avoid being dragged under. She watched the man who conquered Gaul fight for his life like a cornered animal. And she learned every tactic, every gamble, every brutal truth about what power actually costs. But the danger did not end with her brother. The Ptolemaic blood was thick with ambition. Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe, was also trapped inside the palace. Arsinoe carried the same lethal hunger for the throne. When the chaos was at its peak, she slipped past the Roman guards, escaped the palace, and defected straight to the enemy. She declared herself the rightful queen of Egypt. She rallied the Egyptian army, executed her own commanders when they disappointed her, and proved she was every bit as ruthless as the sister she was trying to destroy. Cleopatra was now fighting a war on two fronts, against a brother and a sister, both trying to end her life. The siege broke when Roman reinforcements finally shattered the Egyptian lines. At the Battle of the Nile, Caesar's veterans cut through the Egyptian forces with devastating efficiency. The collapse was total. Soldiers fled in every direction. Thousands were slaughtered in the mud. and the reeds along the riverbank. Ptolemy XIII tried to run. He boarded a small vessel on the Nile, but the boat was already overflowing with panicked, fleeing men. The boy king was wearing his ceremonial golden armor, a symbol of a power he never truly held. The boat capsized. The gold pulled him straight to the river floor. He drowned in the dark water, swallowed by mud and the crushing weight of his own delusion. Cleopatra did not mourn him. She did not even pause. With her brother rotting at the bottom of the Nile, Cleopatra reclaimed the throne. But tradition and Roman law demanded she could not rule without a male counterpart. So she married her last surviving brother, Ptolemy XIV. He was 12. He was nothing, a shadow, a name on a decree. He held no authority, no voice, and no future. Cleopatra ignored him completely, turning her full attention to consolidating Egypt and managing the most valuable asset she had ever acquired, Julius Caesar. She traveled to Rome. She moved into Caesar's personal estate. She paraded her wealth and her influence directly in the face of the Roman Senate, and she gave birth to a son, Caesarion, announcing to the world that the heir of the most powerful man alive was hers. Then came March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. Caesar was surrounded on the Senate floor and stabbed 23 times by men he had called friends. Rome detonated into chaos, and Cleopatra's shield, her protector, her weapon, was gone. She was stranded in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by politicians who had always despised her presence. She did not collapse. She gathered her people, boarded her ships, and sailed directly back to Alexandria. The moment she set foot on Egyptian ground, the calculation was already complete. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, was growing. Soon he would be old enough to attract advisors. Soon those advisors would try to use him as a weapon, exactly the way it had happened before. Cleopatra was not going to replay that war. She believed in solving problems before they became threats. Shortly after her return, Ptolemy XIV died. Suddenly. Violently. Ancient sources mention a mysterious illness. Modern analysis tells a far grimmer story. Aconite, wolfsbane, a poison that destroys the body from the inside over agonizing hours. The order came from the throne. Cleopatra killed her own brother with the detached efficiency of someone clearing a line from a ledger. She immediately placed her infant son, Caesarion, as co-regent beside her. A toddler cannot conspire. A toddler cannot raise an army. Cleopatra now held Egypt in an absolute, unchallenged grip. But one thread was still loose: Arsinoe. After the war in Alexandria, Caesar had captured Arsinoe and dragged her through the streets of Rome in golden chains. Then, in a rare act of restraint, he exiled her to the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. The temple was sacred ground. Anyone within its walls was supposed to be untouchable, protected by divine law. Violence inside the sanctuary was considered the highest blasphemy imaginable. Arsinoe believed she was beyond reach. She lived among the priests, watched the political winds shift across the Mediterranean, and perhaps dreamed of a return. She made one fatal miscalculation. She underestimated how long her sister's memory lasted, and she underestimated the complete absence of any moral boundary in Cleopatra's mind. Before we witness what happens next, I need to speak directly to those of you who understand what this channel is becoming. If the real, unfiltered truth of human history is what keeps you here, then you are not just a viewer. You are part of something. I am inviting you to join our channel membership, The Lineage. This is not a donation button. This is a draft into the inner circle. By joining The Lineage, you become a patron of the darkest, most honest history being told anywhere on this platform. You get early access to the most brutal episodes before the public, exclusive content, and a badge that marks you in the comments as one of us. We are preserving the real, bloody record of the past. Step up. Join the ranks. Help us keep building. Years passed. Rome was tearing itself apart again. The assassins who had butchered Caesar were hunted across the empire by his loyalists. A new vacuum opened at the center of the world, and the man who stepped into it was Mark Antony, a towering, battle-scarred, explosively aggressive Roman general. He summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to answer for her political decisions during the Civil War. Cleopatra read him instantly. Antony was not Caesar. He was not a chess player. He was a hammer, a man ruled by pride, spectacle, and raw appetite. She knew exactly how to dismantle him. But before she set foot on his territory, before a single word about alliances or empires was spoken, she made one demand: a test of loyalty, and the final erasure of her bloodline. She demanded her sister's execution. Antony did not hesitate. He dispatched his killers to the sacred temple of Artemis. They did not pause at the threshold. They did not respect the sanctuary. They broke through the doors. They found Arsinoe clutching the altar, begging for mercy from gods who were not listening. They seized her by the hair, dragged her screaming across the marble floor, and cut her throat open in the house of the goddess. Her blood spread across the sacred stone. Cleopatra was nowhere near the temple. She did not need to be. With that single act, every living member of her family who could have ever contested her throne was gone. She had engineered the extinction of her own blood and used the rulers of the known world as her executioners. The throne of Egypt was finally, completely, irreversibly hers. But the game was far from finished. Mark Antony was waiting, convinced he was about to bend a queen to his will. He had no idea what was walking toward him. He thought he was the hunter. He was about to learn that he was nothing more than the next target on her board. The greatest lie ever told about Cleopatra is the one that has survived the longest. For 2,000 years, every poet, every painter, every filmmaker has recycled the same fantasy. A breathtaking woman, fragile, emotional, destroyed by her own romantic devotion to two powerful men. It is a lie so complete, so thoroughly embedded in culture, that most people have never once questioned it. But it is a fabrication, and it is an insult to the terrifying intelligence of the woman who actually lived. Erase the image of the lovesick queen draped across a couch, waiting for a man to save her. The real Cleopatra did not trade in romance. She traded in military hardware, financial leverage, and the systematic psychological dismantling of the most dangerous men on earth. If you look at the coins struck during her reign, you do not see a goddess. You see a woman with a sharp jaw, a prominent hooked nose, and an expression that offers nothing. No warmth, no invitation. She did not bend the ancient world with beauty. She bent it with a mind that never stopped calculating and a conscience that never once intervened. She was a scholar of economics, warfare, and the fracture points of human ego. She spoke 9 languages. When she sat across from Ethiopian mercenary commanders, desert chieftains, or Roman generals, she never brought a translator. She spoke to each of them in their own tongue, staring directly into their eyes. This was not charm. This was domination. She refused to let any barrier, any intermediary, stand between her and total control of a conversation. By 41 BC, Rome was bleeding through yet another cycle of catastrophic violence. The The men who murdered Caesar had been crushed at the Battle of Philippi. From the wreckage, two figures carved the world in half. In the west, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, young, pale, physically unimpressive, but surgically intelligent. In the east, Mark Antony. Understand exactly what Mark Antony was. He was not a thinker. He was a force. Massive, loud, physically overwhelming, built for the front line of a cavalry charge, not the back room of a political negotiation. His soldiers loved him because he bled with them, drank with them, divided the spoils with them. But beneath the muscle and the bravado, Antony was deeply vulnerable. He was impulsive. He was addicted to spectacle. And he was fatally susceptible to anyone who knew how to feed his ego while starving his judgment. Cleopatra had a complete psychological blueprint of this man before she ever laid eyes on him. Antony had established his military headquarters in Tarsus, in what is now southern Turkey. He was planning something enormous, a full-scale invasion of the Parthian Empire, Rome's most dangerous enemy in the east. But mobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers across brutal terrain required resources on a scale that even Rome could not easily provide. He needed grain, he needed siege equipment, he needed gold, oceans of it. And only one kingdom on earth had that kind of liquid wealth sitting in its vaults: Egypt. Antony sent a series of aggressive, imperious letters to Alexandria. He ordered Cleopatra to appear before him in Tarsus and answer charges that she had secretly financed Caesar's assassins. It was a raw display of Roman authority. He expected the queen to arrive on her knees, trembling, ready to hand over whatever he demanded. Cleopatra did not respond. She ignored the first letter. She ignored the second. She ignored the third. For months, she let the most powerful military commander on the planet sit in his camp, waiting while his officers watched. She was not being careless. She was dismantling his authority before the negotiation even started. She would not be summoned. She would not be rushed. She would arrive on her own terms, at her own pace. And when she finally appeared, she would deliver a psychological strike so overwhelming that Antony would never fully recover from it. When her ship finally entered the river Cydnus at Tarsus, it was not a diplomatic arrival. It was an invasion wrapped in gold and incense. The accounts that survive are almost impossible to believe. She did not bring a modest delegation. She brought a floating monument to wealth so extreme it was designed to short-circuit the brain of every Roman soldier watching from the shore. The hull of her barge was sheathed in gold. It caught the sun and threw blinding light across the water and into the eyes of the men lining the riverbanks. The sails were dyed in Tyrian purple, a pigment so rare that a single pound of it was worth more than a Roman veteran would earn in an entire lifetime of war. The oars were solid silver, rising and falling in rhythm with musicians hidden below the deck playing flutes and lyres. But the most devastating element was invisible. Cleopatra had ordered massive braziers of exotic incense lit across the ship. The smoke rolled off the deck and drifted for miles over Tarsus, reaching the Roman camps long before the barge itself came into view. By the time the ship docked, the entire city, including Antony's hardened veterans, had abandoned their positions and rushed to the river. Cleopatra reclined on the deck dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of desire. Boys painted as cupids fanned her, while her attendants, costumed as sea nymphs, worked the ropes and sails. Every single detail was engineered. This was not vanity. This was a military-grade psychological operation. Cleopatra knew that Antony publicly identified himself with Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, theater, and conquest. By arriving as Aphrodite, she was not offering herself as a woman. She was offering a divine union, She was speaking directly to the mythological identity he had built for himself, feeding it, inflating it, and in doing so, making herself indispensable to it. Antony, desperate to maintain some illusion of Roman superiority, sent an envoy inviting her to dine at his headquarters. Cleopatra refused. She sent the messenger back with a counteroffer. The Roman general would come to her ship. Antony folded. He stepped onto her golden barge and walked directly into a trap that had been designed months in advance. The banquet that night broke every known standard of excess. The floors were buried under 2 feet of fresh rose petals, held in place by invisible netting, so guests could walk without slipping. The plates were gold. The cups were encrusted with jewels. The sheer volume of rare meat, imported wine, and exotic delicacies was calibrated to make Rome itself look like a backwater outpost. Antony sat in the middle of it, overwhelmed, suddenly aware that the wealth he had spent his life killing for was a fraction of what this woman spent on a single evening. The next night, Cleopatra escalated. She hosted an even more lavish feast. During the meal, Antony, trying to mask his discomfort, made a joke about the obscene cost of the banquet. Cleopatra looked at him and smiled. She wagered that she could consume 10 million sesterces, the equivalent of tens of millions of modern dollars, in a single course. Antony took the bet. He thought it was physically impossible. Cleopatra called for a glass of strong vinegar. She was wearing 2 of the largest, most perfect pearls ever found in human history as earrings. Without hesitation, she unclasped one, held it over the glass, and dropped it in. The calcium reacted with the acid immediately, fizzing, dissolving. Before Antony could speak, before anyone at the table could process what was happening, the pearl was gone. Cleopatra lifted the glass, locked her eyes on Antony's, and drank every drop. The message was absolute. She was telling him, without a single word of negotiation, that the military budget he had spent his entire career bleeding for was a garnish to her, a throwaway, an appetizer she could swallow without blinking. His psychological defenses collapsed in that moment. He was no longer sitting across from a foreign ruler. He was kneeling in front of something he could not outspend, outthink, or outmaneuver. From that night forward, Mark Antony stopped functioning as an independent Roman commander. He became Cleopatra's most expensive, most dangerous acquisition. She did not simply give him the gold he came for. She purchased him. And once the transaction was complete, she began the methodical work of severing him from everything that made him Roman. She convinced him to abandon his soldiers in Syria and spend the entire winter of 41 to 40 BC in Alexandria. Historians have romanticized this period endlessly, calling it their great love affair. They formed a private club called the Society of Inimitable Livers. They threw wild feasts, disguised themselves as commoners to wander the streets at night, played elaborate drinking games, and lived in what looked like pure, reckless abandon. Look past the surface. This was not a romance. This was an isolation protocol. Every hour Antony spent gambling and drinking in Alexandria was an hour Octavian spent in Rome consolidating power, buying loyalty, and poisoning the Senate against his absent rival. Cleopatra controlled Antony's calendar. She controlled his meals, his entertainment, his access to information. She was cutting every cord that connected him to Rome, one invisible thread at a time. She was not loving him, she was domesticating him. The consequences for Antony were devastating. Back in Italy, his wife Fulvia, a woman as politically lethal as anyone in Rome, saw exactly what was happening. Watching her husband be hollowed out from across the sea, Fulvia raised her own army and launched a civil war, the Perusine War. in a desperate attempt to force Antony to leave Egypt and remember who he was. It worked, temporarily. Antony broke away. He sailed back to Italy, negotiated a fragile peace with Octavian, and even married Octavian's sister Octavia after Fulvia's sudden death. For 3 years, Cleopatra waited in Alexandria. She managed her empire, she raised the twins Antony had fathered, and she watched. She knew the alliance between Antony and Octavian would crack. She knew Antony's pride could not tolerate being the junior partner. And she knew that when his obsession with conquering Parthia resurfaced, he would need her treasury again. In 36 BC, the leash tightened. Antony assembled a massive invasion force aimed east, but his supply chain was unsustainable without Egyptian gold. He sent for Cleopatra to meet him in Antioch. She did not arrive as a lover. She arrived as a negotiator with terms already drafted. She agreed to bankroll his war, but the price was staggering. She forced Antony to sign over vast territories to the Egyptian crown. The cedar forests of Lebanon, the balsam plantations of Jericho, stretches of the wealthy Phoenician coast, the island of Cyprus. He was carving pieces off the body of the Roman Republic and handing them to a foreign sovereign, all to fund his own ambition. And he signed every document she put in front of him. With Egyptian gold behind him, Antony marched his legions into the frozen mountains of Parthia. It was a catastrophe. Parthian cavalry shredded his supply lines with relentless hit-and-run attacks. His siege equipment was destroyed. His men froze in mountain passes, starved in valleys, and died by the thousands from arrows, disease, and exposure. Over 30,000 elite Roman soldiers perished in the snow. It was one of the most humiliating military failures in Roman history. Antony dragged what was left of his army back to the Syrian coast. He was physically wrecked, emotionally shattered, and politically disgraced. His Roman wife, Octavia, traveled from Italy with fresh troops and supplies, a public gesture of loyalty designed to pull him back into Rome's orbit. This was the moment that could have changed everything. If Antony accepted Octavia's hand, he would return to the Roman fold, damaged but alive, diminished but still a player. Cleopatra could not let that happen. She deployed one of the most precise emotional manipulations in recorded history. She sent frantic letters to Antony claiming she was refusing food, wasting away, that she would die if he chose his Roman wife over her. She weaponized despair. She turned vulnerability into a cage. It worked. Antony ordered Octavia to turn her ships around and return to Italy. It was an act of public humiliation against Octavian's own blood, a complete, irreversible rejection of Rome. Antony did not sail home as a defeated general. He sailed back to Alexandria, back into the arms of the only person who could afford to rebuild what was left of him. Cleopatra now owned him completely. She spent the next 2 years financing his recovery, allowing him to claim a minor, heavily exaggerated victory in Armenia to restore some fragment of his reputation. And then, in 34 BC, she staged the single most provocative political event the ancient world had ever seen. The donations of Alexandria. Before we get into what happened next, the moment that made global war inevitable, I need to point you toward the foundation of everything you are hearing. The financial mechanics of Cleopatra's empire, the exact scale of the Parthian disaster, the psychological architecture behind every move she made, none of this comes from surface-level history. If you look at your screen right now, you will see the View Products button. Open it. The primary source material behind this investigation is sitting right there. This is not a casual read. It is a monolithic archive of the violence, economics, and manipulation that built and destroyed the Ptolemaic world. You need this artifact if you want to understand the full depth of what we are uncovering. And while you are there, look at the rest of the curated collection we have assembled. There are relics and immersive pieces designed for the people who want to carry this history with them. Open the vault. Secure your pieces. Then come back. We are not finished. The donations of Alexandria was not a celebration. It was a direct challenge to the sovereignty of Rome. Cleopatra ordered an enormous silver platform erected in the great gymnasium of Alexandria. On top of it, 2 thrones of solid gold were placed, one slightly higher than the other. Cleopatra sat on the higher throne, draped in the sacred vestments of the goddess Isis. Mark Antony sat below her, costumed not as a Roman consul, not as a senator, but as the Greek god Dionysus. He was no longer representing the Republic. He was a supporting character in Cleopatra's mythology. Before a crowd of tens of thousands, Antony stood and committed the most devastating act of treason in Roman history. He formally proclaimed that Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, was the only true biological heir of Julius Caesar. This was a direct blade aimed at the throat of Octavian's entire political legitimacy. And he did not stop. He began distributing the eastern half of the known world to Cleopatra's children, as if he were handing out festival gifts. Armenia, Media, the unconquered Parthian Empire, Syria, Phoenicia, Cyrenaica. He was systematically dismantling Roman territory from a golden stage in Africa, with the woman who controlled his every thought sitting above him in silence. When word of this ceremony reached Rome, the reaction was volcanic. Octavian saw his opening and drove through it with surgical precision. He did not simply spread propaganda. He executed one of the most audacious political strikes in history. In 32 behind Sitami Frafantri, Octavian stormed the Temple of the Vestal Virgins. The Vestals were Rome's most sacred priestesses, guardians of the eternal flame, protectors of the private wills of the most powerful men in the Republic. Their temple was inviolable. Octavian did not care. He forced his way in and seized Mark Antony's sealed private will. He carried it directly to the Senate floor. He broke the seal, and he read it out loud. Whether the document was entirely authentic or partially fabricated by Octavian no longer mattered. The words landed like a declaration of war. The will stated that upon his death, no matter where he fell, Antony's body must be transported to Alexandria and buried beside Cleopatra. He had left enormous portions of Roman wealth to her foreign-born children. The Senate exploded. This was undeniable evidence that Mark Antony had been completely consumed. He was no longer a citizen of Rome. He was a puppet, hollowed out and operated by a foreign queen who intended to move the center of the world from the banks of the Tiber to the shores of the Nile. Rome's war machine activated. The Senate formally stripped Antony of every title and every command. But Octavian understood public sentiment with surgical clarity. Declaring war on a fellow Roman would fracture the Republic. So the Senate did something far more calculated. They did not declare war on Mark Antony. They declared war on Cleopatra. The trap she had spent a decade engineering had finally sprung, but it had closed on the wrong person. Cleopatra had catastrophically underestimated the sheer, unified violence that a threatened Rome could unleash. The largest naval armada ever assembled was already gathering off the coast of Greece, pointed directly at Egypt. The end was no longer theoretical. It was on the water, moving closer with every tide, and waiting at the front of that armada was the one mind on earth that was colder, more patient, and more ruthless than Cleopatra's own. The war machine of Rome was not an army. It was a natural disaster with a chain of command. And in 32 BC, Octavian aimed the full, unrestrained force of that disaster at a single target. Not Antony. Antony was irrelevant. The objective was Cleopatra, and more precisely, every coin in her treasury. Octavian understood a truth that most people never think about. Whoever controlled Egyptian grain controlled whether Rome starved or ate, and whoever controlled whether Rome ate controlled the entire known world. Antony and Cleopatra gathered their forces in Greece for what both sides knew would be a decisive, world-ending confrontation. On paper, their military strength was terrifying. Over 500 warships, nearly 100,000 infantry, enough steel and timber to blot out the coastline. But mass has a cost. You cannot park 100,000 men on the shore of the Ambracian Gulf and expect them to stay alive without a constant, uninterrupted river of food and supplies. Octavian's fleet commander, a brilliant tactician named Agrippa, saw the flaw immediately. He did not charge the Egyptian armada head-on. He dismantled it from the edges. He seized the surrounding islands. He hunted down every grain ship trying to reach Antony's camp and sank them one by one. He sealed the Gulf shut. No supplies in, no fleet out, a perfect naval stranglehold. The effect was devastating. By the summer of 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra's encampment had become a mass grave in slow motion. Malaria tore through the ranks. Dysentery hollowed men out from the inside. Soldiers boiled leather for food. Sailors died by the hundreds in the heat, their corpses stacking along the shoreline until the Gulf itself reeked of decay. The collapse was not just physical, it was psychological. Antony's most senior Roman officers, men who had bled beside him for years, began disappearing in the dark. They slipped past the blockade and surrendered to Octavian. Those who stayed begged Antony to abandon the fleet, retreat inland, and fight on solid ground. They blamed Cleopatra for everything. They demanded she be sent home. Cleopatra refused. The entire Egyptian treasury was loaded aboard her flagship. She understood with perfect clarity that the moment she left, Antony's forces would collapse, and her gold would fall into Roman hands. She was paying for the war. She was dictating the strategy. And she enforced loyalty the only way she knew how. She ordered the execution of anyone who showed the faintest hint of disloyalty and demanded that Antony commit to a naval breakout. Not a battle for victory, a battle for escape. The goal was simple: punch through the blockade, get the queen and the gold to open water, and run for Alexandria. On September 2nd, 31st BC, the Battle of Actium began. Antony pushed his heavy warships out of the Gulf to face Octavian's fleet. His vessels were enormous, kinkarems loaded with artillery and siege towers, built to crush anything in their path. But Agrippa's ships were smaller, faster, and far more maneuverable. They did not try to match the Egyptian giants head-on. They swarmed. They darted in, launched volleys of flaming arrows into the timber hulls, hurled iron grappling hooks, and pulled back before the heavier ships could respond. The sea burned. Timber split apart. Men screamed as fire ate through their decks, and their armor dragged them under the surface. Then, the wind shifted. It swung toward the open Mediterranean. Cleopatra was positioned at the rear of the formation with 60 Egyptian warships. She saw the gap. She did not pause. She did not send reinforcements forward to help Antony's collapsing line. She ordered her captains to raise the purple sails. Her entire squadron broke formation, drove through the wreckage of burning ships, and ran for open water. She took the treasury with her. She left the battle behind. This was not panic. It was triage. The engagement was already lost. Staying meant losing the gold and the crown. She severed the dying half to preserve what still had a pulse. What happened next is the clearest evidence of how completely Mark Antony had been dismantled as a man. A Roman commander, watching his fleet burn, has one duty: stay, rally, fight to the end, or die with his soldiers. Antony did none of that. The moment he saw Cleopatra's purple sails shrinking toward the horizon, he abandoned his flagship. He boarded a fast galley and chased her. He left nearly 100,000 men dying in the water behind him, leaderless. When his galley caught up to the flagship, Cleopatra barely looked at him. She allowed him aboard, but she did not speak to him. For 3 days, Antony sat alone at the front of the ship, head in his hands, staring at the water. The full weight of what he had done was settling into his bones. He had betrayed every oath a Roman soldier ever takes, and the woman he had sacrificed it all for treated him like a piece of cargo she had not expected to pick up. Cleopatra had no time for grief. Her mind was already running the next set of calculations. She knew that the moment news of Actium reached Alexandria, every ambitious courtier in the palace would smell weakness and move against her. She had to control what people believed before the truth could spread. As her surviving ships approached the harbor, she ordered them draped in laurel wreaths. She had musicians play victory hymns at full volume. She sailed into her own capital, projecting the image of absolute triumph. The second she stepped off the ship and secured the palace, she dropped the performance. She ordered the immediate execution of several noblemen she suspected of disloyalty. She dragged King Artavasdes of Armenia from the dungeons and had him beheaded in the courtyard. She sent his severed head to a neighboring king, trying to buy a military alliance with a dead man's skull. She was purging, consolidating, and arming herself for the siege she knew was coming. While Antony retreated to the Libyan coast and collapsed into a fog of despair and alcohol, Cleopatra launched a plan so extreme it borders on the unbelievable. The Mediterranean was lost. Octavian owned the sea. Cleopatra needed an escape route that bypassed his entire fleet. She decided to move her remaining warships from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, overland, across the desert. She enslaved thousands of laborers. She had them construct massive wooden rollers. They physically dragged full-size warships out of the water and hauled them across the sands of the Isthmus of Suez. Gold, soldiers, children, everything she could carry was loaded for a voyage to India, a new empire beyond Rome's reach. The plan was destroyed by old enemies. The Nabatean Arabs, a fierce desert people who had suffered years of Cleopatra's aggressive taxation and border raids, saw the ships sitting exposed on the dunes. They struck without warning. They killed the guards and set fire to the timber. Cleopatra's entire escape fleet burned to nothing in the desert sand. There was no way out. She was sealed inside Alexandria, and Octavian's hardened legions were marching across the Sinai, headed straight for her. She accepted it, but she would not let anyone else decide how this ended. She ordered the construction of a massive, windowless stone mausoleum beside the Temple of Isis. Inside it, she stockpiled the entire remaining wealth of the Ptolemaic dynasty: mountains of gold bars, chests of uncut diamonds, emeralds, pearls, rare spices, ivory, ebony, enough treasure to fund an empire for a generation. Then she surrounded it all with piles of dry flax, barrels of pitch, and pools of flammable oil. The message to Octavian was simple and absolute. Come for me, and I drop a torch. The gold, the jewels, all of it, turns to ash. And Cleopatra knew that Octavian's soldiers were owed fortunes in back pay. Without this treasure, his own legions would tear him apart from the inside. She had turned her own death into a weapon pointed directly at the Roman economy. At the same time, she converted part of the royal palace into something far darker. She needed to die, but on her terms. No suffering, no ugliness. She needed a method that would preserve the image she intended to leave behind. She had condemned prisoners brought up from the dungeons. She forced them to ingest different poisons while she sat and observed. She watched hemlock cause violent convulsions and foaming. She watched belladonna suffocate its victims in slow paralysis. She studied the hemorrhaging caused by aconite. She rejected all of them. Too violent, too messy, too undignified. She turned to venom. She had exotic serpents brought in and tested their bites on the prisoners. She discovered that the Egyptian cobra did not produce the thrashing and disfigurement of other poisons. Its venom induced a heavy, drowsy numbness. The victim simply slowed down, as if falling asleep, until breathing stopped and the heart gave out. No spasms, no screaming, no distortion of the face. It was the death she wanted. In the summer of 30 BC, Octavian's legions arrived at the walls of Alexandria. Antony, shaken from his paralysis by the sound of war, strapped on his armor one last time. He led what remained of his cavalry in a desperate charge against Octavian's forward units and actually managed to win a brief skirmish. He rode back to the palace blood-soaked, ecstatic, kissing Cleopatra with the taste of battle still on him. It meant nothing. The next morning, Antony ordered his fleet and his last infantry units to counterattack. He stood on high ground above the harbor and watched them move. He watched his Egyptian ships row out toward the Roman navy, raise their oars in unison, and quietly surrender. He watched his cavalry wheel their horses and ride straight into Octavian's camp without a single weapon drawn. The army had been bought. The war was over before breakfast. Antony shattered. He screamed into the open air that Cleopatra had sold him out, that she had secretly negotiated the surrender to save herself. Whether that was true, no one can say with certainty. What is certain is what happened next. Cleopatra heard him. She knew that Antony in this state was as dangerous to her as Octavian. She fled the palace and locked herself inside the mausoleum, sealing the massive iron doors behind her. Only two people entered with her, Iris and Charmian, her two most loyal handmaidens. Then she played her final card against Antony. She sent a servant to deliver a single message. The queen is dead. She has killed herself. Cleopatra knew exactly what those words would trigger. Antony had nothing left. No army, no empire, no honor. The only thing still tethering him to life was her. She cut the rope. When the message reached him, Antony did not break down. He turned to his bodyguard, a man named Eros, and ordered him to drive a sword through his chest. Eros drew the blade. He looked at his general. Then he turned the sword on himself and fell dead at Antony's feet. Antony stared at the body. He said something about a servant having more courage than a commander. Then he drew his own gladius and drove it into his stomach. He missed the organs that would have killed him quickly. He collapsed to the floor, bleeding massively, his insides exposed through the wound. He begged the servants around him to finish it. They refused. They ran from the room and left him writhing on the stone. Eventually, word reached him that Cleopatra was alive. She was inside the mausoleum. Antony, with the last strength in his body, demanded to be carried to her. His men dragged his broken body across the palace grounds to the base of the tomb. Cleopatra would not open the doors. She was terrified that Roman soldiers were waiting nearby to rush in the moment the seal broke. Instead, she and her two handmaidens lowered ropes from a narrow window near the roof. They tied the ropes around Antony's body and began to pull. Cleopatra, a woman who had never lifted anything heavier than a golden cup in her life, hauled the full weight of a dying Roman general up the face of a stone wall. Ancient sources say her face was twisted with effort, the muscles in her arms tearing. Antony's body scraped against the limestone, leaving dark, wet streaks of blood across the white surface. When they finally pulled him through the window, he was barely breathing. She laid him on her bed. She clawed at her own clothes, beat her chest, wiped the blood from his face. He told her not to grieve for how it ended, but to remember the years when he had been the most powerful man alive. He asked for wine. He drank, and he was gone. Cleopatra did not have the luxury of mourning. The final move was already in play. Octavian wanted her alive more than he wanted anything else on earth. He needed to chain her to a golden chariot and parade her through the streets of Rome. That was his trophy. If she died, his triumph would be hollow. And if she burned the treasure, his entire financial structure would collapse. He sent a trusted officer named Proculeius to the mausoleum. Proculeius stood outside the sealed iron doors and spoke to Cleopatra through a small grate. He offered safety. He promised dignity. She demanded the Egyptian throne for her children. The conversation circled, went nowhere, accomplished nothing. That was the point. While Proculeius held her attention at the door, another Roman soldier quietly raised a ladder against the back of the building. He climbed to the same narrow window they had used to haul Antony inside. He dropped silently to the floor behind her. Cleopatra heard him land. She spun around. In one motion, she drew a concealed blade from her robes and drove it toward her own chest. The soldier lunged. He tackled her to the ground, ripped the dagger from her hand, and searched her clothes for hidden poisons. The Queen of Egypt was now a prisoner. Octavian entered Alexandria and allowed Cleopatra to remain in the palace under constant, suffocating guard. He visited her personally. What he found was carefully curated devastation. She had starved herself. She had torn at her own face and chest until the skin was raw and infected. She threw herself at his feet, sobbing, and handed him a written inventory of her remaining wealth. During this meeting, her own treasurer, Seleucus, stepped forward and publicly accused her of lying. He told Octavian she had hidden a massive reserve of jewels that were not on the ledger. Cleopatra erupted. She leapt off the floor, grabbed the treasurer by his hair, and beat him in the face with her fists, right in front of the man who now owned her life. Octavian laughed. He thought it was a desperate, undignified display of a broken queen clinging to her last scraps of vanity. He told her to keep the hidden jewels. He assured her she would be treated well. He walked out of the room confident that he had won. He had not won a single thing. Cleopatra had staged the entire confrontation with Seleucus. She needed Octavian to believe she still cared about wealth. She needed him to believe she wanted to live. She needed him to relax, because she knew exactly what was coming. In 3 days, she and her children were scheduled to be shipped to Rome and dragged through the streets in chains. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra asked permission to visit the tomb of Mark Antony for a final religious offering. Octavian allowed it. She performed the rites, returned to her chambers, and ordered a lavish bath. She washed herself clean. She dressed in the full, sacred regalia of the goddess Isis. Every piece of jewelry, every symbol of divine authority she possessed. She ordered a feast and ate without restraint, abandoning the starvation that had been part of the performance. Then she sat down and wrote a short letter. She sealed it and handed it to a Roman guard with instructions to deliver it to Octavian immediately. The moment the guard left the room, she locked the doors. She was alone with Eros and Charmian. Across the city, Octavian broke the seal and read the letter. It was brief. It contained no plea, no bargain. It was a single, regal demand. She wished to be buried beside Mark Antony. Octavian understood instantly. He screamed for his guards. He ran. His soldiers smashed through the doors of her chamber. Silence. The air was heavy with incense. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the last of the Ptolemaic blood, was dead. She lay on a golden bed in the full radiance of a goddess. Her face was calm, untouched, as if she had simply decided to sleep. Eros lay on the marble floor at the foot of the bed, dead. Charmian was still standing, barely. The poison was collapsing her nervous system. Her hands were shaking. With whatever strength remained in her body, she was reaching toward the queen's head, straightening the heavy jeweled crown, making sure it sat perfectly in place. A Roman soldier, furious at the failure, shouted at her, "Is this well done, Charmian?" She looked at him with absolute contempt. Her last words have echoed for 2,000 years. It is extremely well done, and fitting for the descendant of so many kings. She fell, dead. How exactly Cleopatra died remains her final mystery. Perhaps a loyal servant smuggled a cobra into the room, hidden beneath a basket of figs. Perhaps she used a hollow pin filled with concentrated venom she had kept concealed in her hair. The mechanism does not matter. The result was flawless. No marks, no suffering, no image of defeat for Rome to parade before the world. Octavian was enraged. He brought in the Psylli, a tribe of renowned snake handlers known for their ability to extract venom from fresh bites, and ordered them to try to revive her. They failed. She was beyond anyone's reach. Cleopatra had stolen the only thing Octavian truly wanted. She denied Rome its spectacle. She bypassed the chains, the chariot, the jeering crowd. She chose the exact moment, the exact method, the exact image the world would remember. And in doing so, she stopped being a queen and became something far more durable. A myth, permanent, untouchable. Hers. Octavian took his revenge on what was left. He lured Caesarion, Cleopatra's teenage son, out of hiding with false promises of safety. When the boy was brought before him, Octavian looked at his generals and delivered a single, ice-cold verdict. 2 Caesars is 1 too many. He had the boy strangled. The Ptolemaic bloodline, 3 centuries of power, ended in a dark room with a rope. Egypt was no longer a kingdom. It became the personal property of the Roman emperor, a province, a grain farm. But Octavian did not win the war that mattered. He took the land. He took the gold. He took the title. But Cleopatra took something he could never reclaim. She took the story. She was a killer, a strategist, a manipulator who weaponized affection and wielded her own death like a blade aimed at the heart of the most powerful empire on earth. She was never a victim. She was never a casualty. She was the architect of every room she ever walked into, including the last one. And 2,000 years later, it is still her name the world remembers, not his. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you demand the unfiltered truth of the past, hit the subscribe button right now. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to wake up and see history for what it actually is. Look at your screen. Click the video appearing in front of you. It is your mandatory next step into the dark past. Watch it immediately to continue your descent. You've just watched another premium documentary by Ancestral, your ultimate history hub on YouTube.